The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel sparkled under a constellation of chandeliers, each crystal catching the light and scattering it around the room like a careless heiress with her diamonds. The air was thick with the muted hubbub of polite conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter from the city's elite gathered for the Children's Hospital's annual benefit dinner. It was a night where everyone put on their best masks and smiles were as carefully crafted as designer dresses and tailored tuxedos. Ashley Harper took center stage, her emerald green dress hugging her figure like a second skin, and her reddish-brown hair pulled back into an elegant bun. She was the epitome of beauty, the kind of woman who makes the room freeze with just her appearance. But today her brown eyes looked somewhere into the distance, gliding through the crowd, not lingering on anyone. Next to her, Brian Harper, her husband of 6 years, was in his element. His jet black suit fit flawlessly, his jawline cut like glass, and his charm was on full blast. He leaned over to shake the hand of the silver-haired man in the dark blue jacket, his laugh sounding warm and casual, like they were old college buddies swapping stories. Ashley knew this man was the hedge fund manager Brian had been hunting for months, the one whose signature could open a deal worth millions for his real estate firm. She also knew that Brian's laughter was as calculated as the seating arrangements. "Another perfect evening, huh?" Brian muttered, lowering his voice and wrapping his arms around her waist. His touch was light, refined, so that from the outside it seemed intimate, but for her it felt like a theatrical prop. Ashley tilted her head slightly, giving her a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Perfect," she responded, her tone smooth as the champagne in her glass. She took a sip, letting the bubbles tickle her tongue, and looked around the room again. Across the street, a woman in a red dress was laughing too loudly at the senator's joke. Outside the bar, a young couple were arguing in whispers, their faces tense with the effort of keeping up appearances. Everyone here played their roles, just like her. "You could at least pretend that you're having fun," Brian said, still quietly, with the same plastered smile. To outsiders, he looked like a man whispering endearments to his beautiful wife. "I'm here, aren't I?" Ashley responded, her words sharp but muffled. She adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist, a gift from Brian for their 5th anniversary. It was delicious, flawless, and cold as ice against her skin. Brian's fingers on her waist tightened for a split second, then relaxed. "Not today, Ash. Not here." She didn't answer, only raised her glass to her lips again and looked toward the stage where the host was introducing the keynote speaker, a pediatric surgeon with a long list of awards. The audience applauded and Ashley joined in, her hands moving automatically. She wondered once again when her life had turned into a set of memorized movements. On the outside, her life with Brian looked perfect. Spacious suburban colonial home with manicured lawn and 3-car garage. A marriage that was written about in the gossip columns, their wedding photos were still circulating on Pinterest boards. Brian's firm was thriving, and Ashley's design business had a waiting list of 6 months ahead. They were the envied couple about whom they whispered, "What is their secret?" But the secret, if you can call it that, was simple. Their marriage was a house of cards, beautiful, but fragile, held together by habit and appearances. They hadn't fought in months, not because they had solved all their problems, but because they had stopped trying. The silence between them was louder than any argument. As the speaker talked about breakthroughs in pediatric oncology, Ashley's thoughts wandered to the past. She and Brian met in college, in a seedy bar near campus. He was in his 3rd year, confident and ambitious, with a smile that was disarming. She was in 2nd grade, studied art history, and dreamed of opening her own design firm. That first night, they talked until the morning about his plans to build skyscrapers, about her love for mid-century modern furniture, about places where they would like to go. Back then, their differences seemed like puzzle pieces that fit perfectly together. Now they were just abysses. "Mrs. Harper, you are simply shining today," a voice said, jerking her back into reality. It was Margaret Klein, the dinner's host, her silver hair styled into a neat chignon, her smile polished like the pearls on her neck. "Thank you, Margaret," Ashley said, her voice warm, her smile automatic. The event, as always, was great. "Oh, you are too kind," replied Margaret, waving her hand. "But I have to say, you and Brian are real stars today. Everyone is talking about your donation for the new wing." Brian, who had previously been absent-mindedly listening to the speaker, turned to his name. "We're just happy to help," he said, his tone humble but proud. "The hospital does an incredible job." Ashley nodded without faltering her smile. The donation was Brian's idea, a strategic move to bolster his reputation as a philanthropist. She agreed, as she had agreed to almost everything lately. It wasn't because she didn't care, she genuinely cared, but the way Brian used their wealth like a chess piece left a bitter taste. Margaret beamed. "You two are a true blessing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check out the auction." She fled, leaving Ashley and Brian standing shoulder to shoulder, with a heavy silence between them. "You shouldn't have agreed with her," Brian said in a whisper, looking at the stage. Ashley's jaw tensed. "What should I have said? That it was your idea and I just signed the check?" He turned to her, his blue eyes narrowed. "You used to worry about such things. What happened to you?" The question stung, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. She was really worried once upon a time. She was the one who dragged him to volunteer in soup kitchens and stayed up late drawing sketches for charity projects. But somewhere along the way, her fire died out. Or maybe he was strangled. "I'm here, Brian," she said, her voice little more than a whisper, as always. He opened his mouth to answer, but the hall erupted in applause as the speaker finished. The moment passed and Brian turned away, clapping along with everyone else. Ashley followed suit, her hands moving mechanically. The rest of the evening passed in a blur small talk with donors, a silent auction where Brian bid on a Napa Valley wine tour, a dessert Ashley barely touched. As they climbed into their black SUV and the city lights flashed behind the tinted windows, the weight of the evening fell on her like a thick fog. "You've been quiet today," Brian said, his voice level as he scrolled through his phone. The driver looked at the road, a silent witness to their routine. "Really?" Ashley replied, looking out the window. The city's skyline sparkled, all sharp angles and cold beauty. Brian sighed, a sound so familiar it was almost comforting. "Ash, I'm trying. I don't know what you want from me." She turned to him, her brown eyes meeting him. For a moment, she wanted to lay it all out, how she felt like a stranger in her life, how she missed their old laughter, how she wasn't sure if she still loved him. But the words stuck in my throat, tangled in years of unspoken grievances. "I don't know either," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "Maybe that's the problem." Brian's jaw tensed, but he didn't respond. He returned to the phone, his face illuminated by the screen in the darkness. Ashley leaned her forehead against the window, the glass cold against her skin, and she let the silence consume them both. As the SUV wound its way through the quiet streets toward their ideal home, Ashley couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing, that there was a crack in the foundation of their carefully constructed life. She didn't know what it meant or where it would lead her. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of fear, perhaps, or hope. In any case, this was the beginning. Saturday morning at the Harper home was as polished as their lives. Sunlight streamed through the living room's tall windows, reflecting off the marble countertops and polished oak floors. Ashley stood at the kitchen island, stirring coffee in a white ceramic mug, her silk robe flowing softly over her shoulders. Outside the window, the gardener was trimming the hedge, and somewhere in the distance, the neighbor's dog was barking. Everything was perfect, nauseatingly predictable. Brian sat at the dining room table, his head glued to his tablet, his brow furrowed as he looked through real estate reports. He was wearing a sports t-shirt and joggers, but even in that form, he looked like he was ready to step onto the cover of a magazine. Ashley glanced at him, but quickly looked away when he didn't look up. They hadn't spoken since last night after they returned from the charity dinner. The silence between them became their new language. The doorbell rang, cutting through the morning silence like a knife. Ashley put the mug down and went to open it, her bare feet walking quietly on the cool floor. She already knew who it was. Only one person showed up unannounced, with such casual confidence as if the Harper house was his second home. "Jason," she said, opening the door, her voice warm, but with a slight hint of fatigue. Jason Clark stood in the doorway, his dark hair slightly disheveled, and his smile, as always, too bright, too dangerous. He was wearing a light linen shirt, unbuttoned at the top button, and jeans that fit as if they had been made especially for him. In his hands, he held a bottle of wine, some ridiculously expensive Bordeaux, judging by the label. "Ash, you look like the morning breeze," he said, his voice low, with a slight huskiness that always seemed a little more intimate than necessary. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, and his gaze slid over her, not brazenly, but slowly enough for her to notice. "You always say that," she replied, rolling her eyes, but the corners of her lips twitched into a smile. She closed the door and followed him into the living room. Her steps were light, but something tightened inside her. Jason had been their family friend, or rather Brian's friend, since college. He was their nephew's godfather, a regular at barbecues and dinner parties, but in recent months his visits had become too frequent and his flirtations too obvious. "Bri, old man, are you still pretending to work on weekends?" Jason plopped down on the sofa, placing the bottle on the coffee table. His tone was friendly, but there was a hint of familiar mockery in it. Brian looked up from his tablet. A brief smile lit up his face. "Someone has to pay for your lifestyle, Jace." "What's this time? Crashed your Porsche again?" "Ha, funny," Jason leaned back, throwing his hands behind his head. "No, I just thought you two could use a little fun. You've been looking like a couple of accountants before tax season for the last couple of months." Ashley snorted, turning back to her coffee. "Thanks for the compliment," she said, leaning against the kitchen island. Her gaze involuntarily lingered on Jason on the way his shirt stretched over his shoulders, the way he looked at her while Brian buried his face in the tablet again. It was that same look that she tried to ignore, but which every time left a mark like a hot coal on the skin. "I'm serious, Ash," Jason continued, his voice a little softer, but still with that damn playfulness. "When was the last time you did something for yourself? Not for the clients, not for this guy," he nodded towards Brian, "but for himself?" Brian chuckled without looking up from the screen. "Careful, Jace. A little more, and she will start to think that you are in love with her." Ashley froze, her fingers clenching around her mug. Jason just laughed, but his eyes never left hers, and there was something about that laugh that made her heart skip a beat. "What if that's true?" he said, his tone half joking, half serious. "Would you challenge me to a duel, Bri?" "I would just stop inviting you," Brian replied, finally putting the tablet down and looking at his friend. His smile was small, but there was something sharp about it, as if he knew there was a game going on, but wasn't sure if he wanted to play it. Ashley felt the air in the room thicken. She set the mug down and crossed her arms, trying to look casual. "Okay, boys, that's enough. Jason, did you bring wine for us to drink or just admire?" "Oh, we'll definitely be drinking," Jason said, rising from the couch with that grace that always seemed a little over-rehearsed to her. He took the bottle and headed towards the kitchen, passing her so close that she caught the scent of his cologne woody with a hint of citrus. "But only if you keep me company, Ash." "Brian seems too busy saving the world." "Saving his company," Brian corrected, but his tone was absent-minded, as if he had already returned to his thoughts about work. Ashley rolled her eyes, but followed Jason to the glass cabinet. He opened the door and took out 3 glasses. His movements were confident, like those of a man who knows this house almost as well as his own. "Red at 10 in the morning?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Why not?" he replied with a wink. "Life is short, Ash. We must take everything from her." She didn't answer, but her lips twitched into a smile again. Jason had always been like this, reckless, charming, with this energy that was both attractive and frightening. He was the opposite of Brian, whose life was laid out like a business plan. And perhaps that was why his presence unsettled her so much. As Jason opened the bottle, Ashley glanced at Brian. He turned his attention back to the tablet, his face unreadable. She knew he noticed Jason's flirting. He wasn't blind. But he never talked about it, made no scenes. Maybe because he didn't consider it a threat, or maybe because he didn't care. "Why are we drinking?" Jason asked, pouring the wine and handing her a glass. His fingers touched her lightly, and she felt a current run through her skin. "For old friends," she said. Her voice was even, but something was trembling inside. She raised her glass, trying not to look into his eyes for too long. "To old friends," Jason repeated, his smile growing a little wider, a little more dangerous. "And for new adventures." Brian finally looked up from his tablet and picked up his glass. "For adventures that do not end in court," he said, and his tone was light, but there was a hint of warning in it. They clinked glasses, and the sound of crystal echoed throughout the room. Ashley took a sip, feeling the wine warm her throat, but her mind was elsewhere. Jason looked at her, and there was something in his gaze that she couldn't or wouldn't decipher. It was a temptation, subtle but palpable, like the scent of his cologne still hanging in the air. When she put the glass down, her fingers trembled slightly. She didn't know what would happen next, but she felt that this day and this person could change everything. And what's worse, part of her wanted it to happen. Tuesday evening enveloped the Harper home in soft twilight. Outside the suburban windows, lanterns were lit, their light reflected in the glass, creating the illusion of warmth. Inside, however, the air was cold, as if someone had forgotten to turn on the heating. Ashley sat on the living room couch, her legs crossed, her fingers fiddling with the edge of the wool blanket. There was an unfinished cup of herbal tea on the coffee table, already cold. She looked at the TV, where some series about lawyers was playing, but the sound was turned off. Her thoughts were somewhere far away, in a labyrinth of unanswered questions. Brian walked into the room, his steps heavy as if he had been carrying it on his shoulders all day. He was still wearing his office shirt, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his tie long since removed. He held the phone in his hands, his face illuminated by the bluish light of the screen. He didn't look at Ashley, he just collapsed into the chair opposite, not looking up from his correspondence. Ashley glanced at him, her lips pursed. "How long will you live with this phone?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Brian looked up, his eyebrows raised slightly. "It's work, Ash. Not everyone can just switch off at 5 in the evening." She snorted, leaning back on the couch. "Don't start. I didn't ask you to switch off. It's just—" She paused, searching for words. "Do you even notice what's going on around you?" He put the phone on the armrest, his gaze becoming colder. "What's going on, Ashley? Enlighten me. Because all I see is you, sitting here with your face like the world has collapsed." Her fingers clenched the blanket. "Maybe it collapsed for me," she said quietly, but with such force that Brian froze. "Can you even see me, Brian? Or am I just part of the decor in your ideal life?" He frowned, his jaw tense. "What kind of drama? You know I'm busy. This deal with Crosby could change everything for the firm. For us. I thought you understood this." "I understand," she snapped, her voice becoming louder. "I always understand. I understand when you cancel our plans to go out to dinner with clients. I understand when you come home at midnight and fall asleep without even asking how my day is. I understand when you spend more time on Jason than on me." Brian blinked, clearly hurt by the latter. "Jason? Seriously, are you going to drag it in now? He's our friend, Ash. He was here before we got married." "Yes, and he's still here," she retorted, her eyes flashing. "Constantly. With his wine, his jokes, his—" She stopped short, not wanting to say the word, flirting out loud. Not because she was afraid of Brian's reaction, but because she didn't want to admit how much it hurt her. Brian leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "What do you want to say? Why is he bothering you? Or that you like him too much?" His tone was even, but there was a threat in it, like a distant clap of thunder. Ashley felt the blood rush to her cheeks. "Don't turn everything upside down," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "This isn't about Jason. It's about us, about how I feel like furniture in this house. I'm a prisoner, Brian, captive of your ambitions, your deals, your damn reputation." He leaned back, His eyes narrowed. Captive? He repeated, his voice becoming lower, more dangerous. Is that what they call it now? A house worth 3 million, a car you dreamed of, a vacation in Bali last year, is this your prison? She stood up abruptly, the blanket slipped to the floor. Don't you dare, she said, her voice like the blow of a whip. Don't you dare reduce everything to money. Do you think this is about them? Do you think I'm sitting here wishing for another diamond ring? I don't care about your millions, Brian. I want you to see me, so that you at least once ask what I want. Brian stood up too, his height and broad shoulders suddenly making the room seem smaller. Did you ask what I want? He snapped, losing control for the first time in the entire conversation. I'm working so that we have all this. So you can do your design without worrying about bills, so that we can live the way you wanted. So what do I get? Constant dissatisfaction, constant hints that I'm not good enough. Ashley stepped towards him, her fists clenching. I never said you weren't good enough, she said, her voice shaking, not from weakness, but from rage. I say that you are absent. You are here, but you are not there. We live like roommates, Brian. When was the last time we talked? Not about bills, not about work, not about what needs to be fixed in the house. About us, about how we feel. He opened his mouth, but fell silent, his gaze darting to the side, as if he was looking for an answer on the wall. Silence hung between them, heavy as lead. Ashley felt her anger begin to dissolve into something more painful weariness, emptiness. I don't know, Ash, he said finally, his voice quieter but still firm. I don't know what you want from me. I'm trying. I really try. Are you trying? She asked, her eyes shining with tears that she refused to shed. You don't even look at me when you say that. You try for your company, for your clients, for everyone except me. Brian ran his hand through his hair, his face a mixture of irritation and impotence. What are you doing, Ashley? You're sitting here complaining, but what are you suggesting? Do you want me to give up everything? Quit. Did I move with you to some hut in the forest, where we will weave baskets and sing about love? She shook her head, her lips curling into a bitter smile. You're not even trying to understand, she said quietly. I don't want you to give up everything. I want you with me, not just physically. Here. She pressed her hand to her chest, her voice breaking. I want you to remember why we got married in the first place. He looked at her, and something flashed in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or a shadow of the Brian she had once loved. But then his face became expressionless again. I don't know how to fix this, he said, his voice almost a whisper. I don't know what you're waiting for. Ashley turned away, her arms crossed over her chest, as if she was trying to keep herself from falling apart. I don't know either, she said, her voice barely audible. But I can't do this anymore. I'm choking, Brian. I can't just be your wife in the window. He took a step towards her, but stopped, his hand frozen in the air. Ash, He began, but fell silent, as if the words were too heavy to say. She shook her head, not looking at him. Don't, she said. Just don't. The silence returned, even more suffocating than before. Brian stood there for a second, then picked up his phone and left the room. His steps faded somewhere in the corridor, and Ashley was left alone. She slowly sank onto the sofa. Her gaze fell on the cold tea, on the blanket lying on the floor, on the TV, where the lawyers were silently arguing. She felt as if she was looking at her life through a cracked mirror. Everything was in place, a beautiful home, a successful husband, her own career, but cracks were spreading, and she didn't know how to stop them. Or maybe she didn't want to stop them. Maybe these cracks were the only thing that reminded her that she was still alive. Ashley closed her eyes, her fingers gripping the edge of the couch. Somewhere in the depths of her mind, the image of Jason flashed his smile, his look, his words that life is short. She pushed the thought away, but it left a mark, like a warm touch in a cold room. And for the first time in a long time, Ashley wondered if she herself should take a step towards these cracks, even if it would destroy everything. The rain pattered against the windows of the Harper house, its rhythm as irregular as a heartbeat. It was quiet inside, too quiet. Brian left for a 2-day conference in Chicago, leaving Ashley alone in their immaculate home. She wandered through the rooms, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness, until she stopped at the window in the living room, watching the drops run down the glass. Her phone lay on the coffee table, the screen flashing a notification from Jason. "Are you home? I'll drop by with coffee." She didn't answer right away. Her fingers froze over the keyboard. Her heart sank from a mixture of fear and something else, something dark, alluring. She knew what it meant, knew where it could lead. And yet she wrote, "Come in." Jason appeared half an hour later, his dark hair damp from the rain, his shirt slightly stuck to his shoulders. In one hand, he held 2 glasses of coffee from a local coffee shop, in the other, a paper bag of croissants. His smile was the same as always, cocky, but with a softness that made it dangerous. "You look like a man who needs saving," he said, setting the coffee down and brushing the drops off his sleeves. His gaze slid over her, her loose t-shirt, her leggings, her loose hair. Nothing special, but his eyes made her feel naked. "Rescue." Ashley raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms to hide the trembling of her fingers. "From what?" "Out of boredom." "From myself," he answered, his voice becoming lower, almost intimate. He stepped closer, and the air between them thickened, as before a thunderstorm. "You've been hiding too long, Ash. It's time to stop." She opened her mouth to protest, but the words stuck. His proximity was palpable, like the heat from a fire. She could smell the rain on his skin, mixed with his cologne, and it made her thoughts cloudy. "Jason," she began, her voice hoarse, "this is a bad idea." "Maybe," he agreed, but his hand had already risen. The tips of his fingers touched her cheek, softly, but with such confidence that she froze. "But you don't want me to leave. Is it true?" Her breathing hitched. She should have said yes, pushed him away, slammed the door. But instead, her body betrayed her, leaning a little closer until the distance between them became almost non-existent. His eyes, dark and deep, held her like a magnet. "This is wrong," she whispered, but her voice was weak, almost a plea. "Then stop me," he said, his lips so close that she could feel their warmth. But she didn't stop. "I couldn't." When he kissed her, it was like a fall swift, dizzying, inevitable. His lips were hard, demanding, but with some kind of tenderness that tore her from the inside. Ashley replied, her hands gripping his shirt, the fabric getting wet under her fingers. Guilt burned her like acid, but the passion was stronger, drowning out everything: reason, conscience, fear. They stumbled onto the sofa, his hands slid under her t-shirt, burning her skin. She gasped as he pressed her against the pillows, his body covering hers, heavy, warm, real. "Ash," he muttered, his voice hoarse, almost painful, "tell me you want it." She wanted to say no, she wanted to remember Brian, their vows, their life. But instead her fingers tangled in his hair, and she pulled him closer. "I want," she breathed, and this word was like a shot, like first blood. Clothes disappeared quickly, haphazardly, falling to the floor like shed skin. His hands were everywhere on her waist, her hips, her neck, and his every gesture was imbued with a hunger that mirrored her own. The rain outside the window was pounding louder, muffling her moans, but not drowning out the guilt that beat in her chest like a second heart. When he entered her, it was both liberation and judgment. She clung to him, her nails digging into his back, as if he could keep her from falling into the abyss she had dug for herself. Then they lay on the sofa, their breathing heavy, their bodies still intertwined. The rain stopped, leaving only silence that was louder than any words. Ashley stared at the ceiling, her chest constricting with a feeling she couldn't name, a mixture of euphoria and horror. Jason lay next to her, his hand resting on her stomach, but he did not speak, as if he knew that any word could destroy everything. "I should have stopped you," she said finally, her voice empty, as if it belonged to someone else. He turned his head, his eyes finding hers. "But you didn't stop," he said softly, without condemnation, but with some sadness. "Me too." She closed her eyes, her throat tightening. The guilt came in waves, but underneath there was something else, a spark of life that she hadn't felt in years, and that scared her most of all. The weeks after that night were like a fever. Ashley lived in 2 worlds, One was her normal life dinners with Brian, calling clients, smiling in public. The other was secret, soaked in adrenaline and fear. Jason became her drug, and she couldn't stop, even knowing that every dose brought her closer to the edge. Their meetings were brief, stolen moments. Sometimes it was his downtown loft, where they could barely close the door before their hands found each other. Sometimes it was her car, parked in a dark corner of the mall, where they kissed like teenagers until the windows fogged up. Each time she told herself that this was the last, but each time she returned. The phone became her enemy and salvation. Jason wrote to her nothing frank, he was too smart for that, but his messages were like encrypted messages. I saw a mid-century style chair today, thought about you, or coffee at 3. She deleted them immediately, but her fingers trembled as she typed the answer. Brian didn't check her phone, he was too engrossed in his work to suspect, but every glance he gave her made her heart skip a beat. One evening, while Brian was in the shower, her phone vibrated on the kitchen island. Ashley grabbed it, her eyes skimming the screen. Tomorrow, my loft, 2 o'clock. I miss. She deleted the message, but her cheeks were burning, as if Brian could see him through the walls. She set the phone face down, her hands shaking so much that she spilled water while pouring herself a glass. Are you okay? Brian asked, appearing in the kitchen, his hair damp, a towel hanging around his neck. Yes, she answered too quickly, wiping the puddle with a rag. I was just thinking. He nodded without looking at her face and took a bottle of water from the refrigerator. I'll be late tomorrow, he said. The meeting with Crosby will drag on. Okay, she said. Her voice was even, but inside she felt her world shrinking. Tomorrow, 2 hours. Jason. The risk of exposure was like a shadow following her everywhere. One day, she almost ran into Brian's girlfriend in a coffee shop where she was waiting for Jason. She lied about stopping by for a latte, but her voice was shaking, and she saw the woman look at her with mild curiosity. Another time, Jason called her while she was in the car with Brian. She ended the call, muttering something about spam, but her palms were sweating and Brian gave her a look that lasted a little longer than usual. But even fear could not stop her. Jason was like oxygen in the room where she had been suffocating for years. His touch, his words, his look, all this reminded her that she was alive. And yet, every time she returned home, she looked at Brian and felt her heart break. She hated herself for it, but she couldn't stop. One night, after another meeting, she was sitting in her car, parked 2 blocks from her house. Her lips were still burning from Jason's kisses, but tears were streaming down her cheeks. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror and did not recognize herself. Who is this woman? What is she doing? She knew she was on the edge, and yet she couldn't back down. The addiction was stronger than her. Saturday morning at the Harper home was deceptively calm. The sun streamed through the French windows, bathing the kitchen in golden light. Ashley stood at the stove, mechanically stirring scrambled eggs. Her thoughts were somewhere far away. She'd barely slept the night before, her mind racing between memories of Jason and the mounting guilt that seemed to be ingrained into her skin. Brian sat at the kitchen island, flipping through the newspaper, a rare moment when he preferred paper to the phone screen. But his gaze kept leaving the pages, gliding over Ashley with a new, almost tangible attentiveness. You're kind of quiet today, he said suddenly. His voice was even, but there was a shadow of a question in it. He folded the newspaper, his fingers tapping on the tabletop. Ashley froze, the spoon in her hand trembling. She forced herself to smile without turning around. I just didn't get enough sleep, she answered, trying to keep her tone light. The customer sent edits at midnight yesterday. Brian chuckled, but his eyes never left her. You haven't been getting enough sleep lately, he remarked, and there was something in his voice that made her heart skip a beat. Not an accusation, not yet, but something close to it. And you often disappear. She turned, her smile still held, but her fingers tightened on the spoon. Am I missing? She asked, trying to sound surprised. Bri, I'm working. You know how it goes. Projects, meetings, everything. He nodded, but his gaze was intense, as if he was searching for a crack in her facade. I know, he said, leaning back in his chair. But before you told me about your projects. Now I don't even know who you're dating. Or where. Ashley felt her throat tighten. She turned to the stove, turning off the heat, and began serving scrambled eggs onto plates to buy time. Nothing interesting, she said, her voice a little higher than necessary. Just a routine. You yourself can't stand it when I start talking about fabrics and color palettes. Brian didn't smile like he usually did when she tried to laugh it off. Instead, he stood up, his step slow as he approached her. She felt his presence behind her, like heat from a fire that could burn. Ash, he said, his voice quieter but firmer. What's going on? She forced herself to turn, her eyes meeting him. His face was unreadable, but his blue eyes showed a mixture of concern and something else, a suspicion that he had not yet voiced. Nothing is happening, she said. Her voice was even, but inside she felt like her world was starting to come apart at the seams. I'm just tired, Bri. Work, home, all this. You know what it's like. He looked at her for a long second, and she could almost see his mind going over her words, looking for lies in them. You have changed, he said finally, his voice almost a whisper. I don't know when it started, but you're different. You're moving away. Her heart began to pound, but she forced herself to laugh short, nervously. Bri, are you serious? I'm the same. Maybe you're the one thinking too much. All these deals, stress. Don't translate it to me, he snapped, his tone becoming harsher. I'm not blind, Ashley. You constantly check your phone as if you're waiting for something. You leave home for meetings, but return empty-handed, and you don't look at me the same way anymore. Her smile faded, and she felt her defenses crumble. How was it before? She asked, her voice trembling. How do you look at me, Brian? When was the last time you even saw me? Not as a wife, not as part of your ideal plan, but as me. He frowned, clearly hurt. Don't start again, he said, his voice growing colder. I'm trying, Ash. I always try. But you are somewhere else. And I want to know where. Her breath hitched, and she turned away, grabbing the plates to keep her hands busy. I'm here, she said, but her voice was weak, almost breaking. I'm not going anywhere. Is it true? He asked, and there was so much pain in his tone that she almost dropped the plate. Because I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't even know why. Silence hung between them, as heavy as wet concrete. Ashley placed the plates on the table, her movements mechanical. She couldn't look him in the eyes, afraid that he would see the truth. Jason, their nights, her betrayal. You're not losing me, she lied, her voice barely audible. Just give me some space, okay? Brian didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, and she felt his gaze like a spotlight. Then he nodded, but there was no agreement in this nod, only fatigue. Okay, he said, returning to his chair, but don't think I don't notice, Ash. I notice. The rest of breakfast passed in silence. Ashley picked at her scrambled eggs, her appetite gone, and Brian returned to his newspaper, but his fingers no longer turned the pages. She knew he was watching her, even if he pretended to read, and this knowledge was like a knife stabbed into her chest. Later, when Brian went into his office to answer a call, Ashley grabbed the phone and locked herself in the bathroom. Her fingers trembled as she opened the chat with Jason. We need to be careful, she wrote, her heart pounding. The answer came almost immediately. Does he know something? She stared at the screen, her throat tightening. Not yet, she typed, but even those words felt like a lie. Brian didn't know, but he felt it. And that was worse. She deleted the conversation as she always did, but her hands were still shaking as she put the phone in her pocket. That night, as they ate dinner, ordered pizza, because neither had the energy to cook. Brian was unusually attentive. He asked about her day, about her clients, even tried to joke about how their neighbor parked on their lawn again. Ashley answered and smiled, but every glance, every question seemed like an interrogation to her. She felt like she was under a microscope, and this made her even more awkward, even more guilty. When they went to bed, Brian turned to her, his hand resting on her waist, a gesture that had not been made for months. She tensed, her body became like a taut string. Ash, he said in the darkness, his voice soft, almost vulnerable. If something is wrong, you can tell me. You know that, right? She lay looking at the ceiling, her eyes burning with tears that she could not shed. I know, she whispered, but her voice was empty. She felt his hand tighten around her waist, but did not respond to the touch. After a few minutes, his breathing became even, and he fell asleep. And Ashley lay awake. Her mind was full of Jason, his lips, his hands, and at the same time Brian, his words, his pain. She knew she was teetering on the edge. Brian was close to putting the puzzle pieces together, and if he did, everything would fall apart. But even the fear of exposure could not drown out her craving for Jason, for the life that he promised her, not with words, but with every look. And this frightened her most of all. She was not sure if she wanted to be saved. Wednesday morning at the Harper home was filled with routine, but beneath the surface a storm was brewing. The coffee maker hummed quietly, filling the kitchen with a bitter aroma as Ashley sat at the table, leafing through an interior design magazine. Her fingers turned the pages, but her eyes did not see a single line. Her thoughts were somewhere else in the dark corners where her meetings with Jason and the guilt that became heavier every day were hidden. She tried to look calm, but every rustle made her flinch, as if someone could burst in and expose her right then and there. Brian, already in his impeccable dark blue suit, was getting ready for his next meeting. He was silent, his movements were precise, but there was a new rigidity in them, as if he was holding back something that he had not yet given a name. Ashley noticed this, but didn't dare ask. Her own secrets were too loud for her to delve into his mood. When he was gone, the door closed with a soft click, and she exhaled, her shoulders slumping as if she had just escaped interrogation. But Brian returned home in the middle of the day, which was unthinkable for him. Ashley was in the living room scrolling through her phone when she heard the key turn in the lock. The clock showed 3 o'clock, too early for him to be home. She straightened up, her fingers clenching the phone, but she forced herself to smile as he entered. His face was as impenetrable as a mask, but his eyes were cold, with a new, almost predatory attentiveness. In his hand was a plain white envelope, unmarked, but he held it as if it were a loaded gun. He didn't say a word, just walked over to the coffee table and placed the envelope in the drawer, his movements slow, almost ritualistic. Ashley felt her heart pounding, but she didn't understand what was happening. His silence was louder than any words. Bri, she began, her voice was light, but there was trembling anxiety in it. You're early. Everything is fine. He looked at her, and his gaze was like a scanner searching for a crack. But he just nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line. Yes, he said, his voice flat, too flat. I just decided to take a couple of hours. Tired. She blinked, trying to read him, but his face was a closed book. Oh, she said, forcing herself to smile. Would you like some coffee? I can cook. No need, he replied, his tone neutral, but there was steel in it. He walked to the sofa and sat down, his movements measured, as if he were playing chess with himself. I'll just sit. Ashley nodded, her fingers nervously fiddling with the hem of her t-shirt. She didn't know why his presence suddenly felt so heavy, but her instincts screamed that something was wrong. She returned to the phone, pretending to read, but her eyes kept returning to him. He sat looking out the window, his hands on his knees, but she could see his fingers curling slightly, as if he were holding something she couldn't see. A storm was raging inside Brian, but he did not let it break out. The envelope he hid in the drawer was like a grenade ready to blow up his world. He found it in the morning in his office, shoved under the door. No signatures, no traces, just white paper and a photo inside. The picture was of Ashley and Jason, his wife, and his best friend standing at the entrance to Jason's loft. His hand on her waist, her face turned towards him, their laughter captured in a clear frame. It was a moment that he couldn't get out of his head, a moment that confirmed all his suspicions, but still tore through his heart like a bullet. He didn't know who sent it. I didn't know why. But he knew one thing. He was not ready to talk. Not Ashley, not Jason, not anyone else. His mind was like a maze, and he decided that the only way to find a way out was to observe. Look, wait. He didn't want to believe it was true, but the photo was real, like the knife in his chest. And now he looked at Ashley, sitting opposite, and saw her in a new way, not as a wife, but as a riddle that he must solve. "You're kind of quiet today," she said suddenly. Her voice was cautious, as if she was trying to sense his mood. He looked up, his gaze calm, but inside he felt his blood boiling. "Just thinking," he replied, his voice as smooth as the surface of a lake before a storm. "About work, about life." She nodded, but her smile was forced. "Well, if you want to talk, I'm here," she said, and her words sounded sincere, but he heard them as lies. Or maybe he wanted to hear it. "Thank you," he said, and his lips twitched slightly in a smile that did not reach his eyes. He stood up, his movements were smooth, but inside he was like a tense spring. "I'll go take a shower. Long day." Ashley watched him leave, her heart pounding. She didn't know what was happening, but his silence was like a shadow hanging over her. She turned back to her phone, her fingers trembling as she opened her chat with Jason. "Are you free today?" she wrote, her mind screaming that it was a mistake, but her fingers had already pressed send. The answer came almost immediately. "Always for you. Loft 5. She deleted the correspondence, her throat tightening. She didn't know why she felt like she was backed into a corner, but instinct told her that something had changed, and it scared her more than she could admit. Brian stood under the streams of hot water, his palms resting against the tiled wall. He closed his eyes, but the image of the photograph did not disappear. Ashley and Jason, his wife and his friend. He felt anger and pain fighting inside him, but he suppressed them, locked them deep inside. He won't talk. Not now. He will watch, listen, and collect pieces. Someone sent him this photo, and that someone wanted him to know. But Brian wasn't going to play by their rules. He will do it his way. That evening he was with Ashley as usual dinner, a few phrases about the weather, even a joke about how their neighbor had forgotten to put the trash cans away again. But his eyes watched her, the way she held her fork, the way her gaze wandered away when she thought he wasn't looking. He noticed how she checked her phone, how her fingers froze before touching the screen. He saw everything, and this knowledge was like poison, slowly poisoning him. When they went to bed, he turned to her, his hand resting on her waist as before. She tensed, and he felt it, but did not show it. "Good night, Ash," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "Good night," she answered. Her voice was quiet, but there was anxiety in it. He closed his eyes, but did not sleep. His mind was busy going over details, making plans. He will watch. He will find out the truth. And when the time comes, he will decide what to do with this smell of blood that was now in the air. Ashley woke up to the sound of her alarm clock, but her eyes were already open. She lay in the darkness of the bedroom, staring at the ceiling as the soft light of dawn filtered through the curtains. Brian slept next to her. His breathing was even, but she knew that he was no longer the same man who had once hugged her in her sleep. Something changed in his gaze, in his silence, in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't noticing. She didn't know what it was, but her instincts screamed that her secret was no longer just hers. She stood up quietly, her bare feet touching the cold floor, and went to the bathroom. Closing the door, she turned on the water to muffle any sound and looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was pale. There were shadows under her eyes that even the best concealer could not hide. She looked like a woman running from something, and perhaps she was. Her life is split into two parts. One is the ideal facade life of a wife and designer. The other is dark, saturated with adrenaline and guilt, where Jason existed. She opened her phone, her fingers trembling as she checked her messages. Jason texted last night. "Are you okay? I feel like you're somewhere far away." She deleted the message as she always did, but her heart sank. She wanted to answer, wanted to feel his voice, his warmth, but the fear was stronger. Fear for her family, for her reputation, for everything she could lose. In recent weeks, her life has become a minefield. She flinched every time Brian took her phone to check the time, or when he asked innocent questions like, "Where were you today?" She lied. Her words were smooth, rehearsed, but every time the lie left a bitter aftertaste. She was afraid that he knew more than he was saying. His silence was not reassuring, but threatening, like the calm before the storm. But the fear was not only for Brian. Ashley began to notice little things that had previously escaped her attention. A neighbor, Mrs. Keller, looked at her strangely when she returned home late, her car still smelling of Jason's cologne. Her friend Linda, with whom she sometimes had coffee, asked why she was so often busy lately, and her tone was more curious than friendly. Even her clients seemed to notice that she was distracted. She had forgotten about an appointment last week, and that wasn't her style. Her reputation, her business, her life, all of it hung in the balance, and she felt that thread thinning. She left the bathroom, putting on a smile like a mask, and went down to the kitchen. Brian was already there, drinking coffee, his eyes glued to the tablet. He looked up as she entered, and his smile was as artificial as her own. "Good morning," he said. His voice was even, but there was a sense of distance in it. "Good," she answered, pouring herself some coffee. Her hands were steady, but inside she was trembling. "Staying late again today?" He nodded without looking up from the screen. "Yes. Crosby wants to renegotiate the terms. Maybe I'll be late." His tone was casual, but something about it made her wary. He didn't ask about her plans and didn't joke like before. He just stared, and it was worse than any questions. Ashley nodded, her fingers clenching around her mug. She wanted to say something to fill the silence, but the words felt like traps. Instead, she sat across from him, pretending to read something on her phone. But her thoughts were occupied with Jason, his last message, his gaze, his hands. She hated herself for it, but she couldn't stop. It was like a drug, and she was addicted, even knowing that each dose brought her closer to disaster. That day she met Jason at his loft. She told herself that this was the last time, that she would just talk to him and put an end to it. But as soon as the door closed, his hands were on her, his lips found hers, and all her promises dissolved in the heat of his touch. They didn't talk about the future, they didn't talk about Brian, they didn't talk about anything that would ruin this moment. But when she left, her heart was as heavy as stone. She knew she couldn't go on like this forever. Someone saw them, that photo she didn't see, but felt like a ghost haunting her. Someone knew. Returning home, she took a shower, trying to wash away Jason's smell, his touch, her guilt. But it didn't help. She stood under the hot water, her tears mixed with the drops, and she felt cornered. She feared for her family, not just for Brian, but for the life they had built, for their home, their reputation. What if someone tells? What if her clients find out? What if her business collapses and her name becomes synonymous with scandal? She imagined headlines in local gossip, whispers at dinner parties, and looks of judgment. And worst of all, she was afraid for Brian. Not for his anger, but for his pain. She knew he didn't deserve this, and the thought tore her up inside. That night, when Brian returned home, he was even quieter than usual. He didn't look at her, didn't ask about her day, just walked into the office and closed the door. Ashley sat in the living room, her hands shaking as she tried to concentrate on her book. But her mind was full of fears. What if he knows? What if he saw something? What if he's waiting to catch her? She felt like an actress playing a role in a play where the script was changing without her knowledge. She didn't know how long she could live this double life. Her love for Jason, if it was love at all, was like a fire that warmed her, but threatened to burn everything around her. And her life with Brian was like a cage, beautiful, but suffocating. She wanted to get out, but didn't know how. And fear for her family, for her reputation, for herself was like a shadow that followed her everywhere. Brian Harper has always been a man of action. His success in business was built on the ability to see opportunity where others saw chaos, and on cold, calculating determination. But now that his personal life was under attack, he felt like a chess player playing a game blindly. The photo of Ashley and Jason tucked away in his desk drawer was like his opponent's first move, and he wasn't going to respond impulsively. He decided to weave his web slowly, imperceptibly, but with absolute precision. Friday morning started as usual. He drank coffee, scrolled through financial news on his tablet, but his thoughts were far away. Ashley was in the shower, her absence giving him a moment to compose himself. He didn't tell her about the photo, didn't show her that his world was collapsing. Instead, he watched her gestures, her gaze, her pauses. He saw how she hid her phone, how her smile became strained when he asked questions. He knew she was lying, but he wasn't ready to show his cards yet. He needed more information, more control. The first step was to consult with a lawyer. He chose Mark Reynolds, an old college acquaintance who was now running a business at a prestigious firm downtown. Brian called him from his office phone, making sure his secretary wasn't listening. The conversation was short, businesslike, without unnecessary emotions. "Mark, I need some advice," he said, his voice level, as if he were discussing a contract. "A personal matter. Confidentially." "Of course, Mark replied, his tone professional but warm. "What are we talking about?" "Marriage," Brian said, his fingers clenching the handle. "Possible divorce. I want to understand my rights, finances, and everything else. But this is still hypothetical. Nobody needs to know." Mark paused, but didn't ask any questions. "Understood. We can meet on Monday in my office. Bring everything you think is necessary, documents, bills, whatever. And don't worry, this will stay between us." "Thanks," Brian said and hung up. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze falling on the framed photo on the table, his and Ashley's wedding photo. Her smile in the photo was so sincere, so alive. He felt his throat tighten, but quickly suppressed the feeling. Emotions won't help. He needs a plan. The next step was a private detective. Brian found him through one of his business associates, who once referred to him as the man who handles sensitive issues. The detective's name was Richard Kane, a man of about 50 with a face that was not memorable and a manner of speaking that did not raise questions. They met in an inconspicuous coffee shop on the outskirts of the city, away from prying eyes. "I need you to keep an eye on my wife," Brian said, his voice quiet but firm. He handed Kane a folder with a photo of Ashley, her schedule, and the addresses she frequented. "And for one person, Jason Clark. I want to know where they go, who they meet, and what they do. All." Kane nodded, his eyes scanning the folder. "Got it," he said, his voice as dry as autumn leaves. "How often do you want reports?" "Weekly," Brian answered. "And I want photographs, recordings, anything you can get. But this should not be noticeable. No one needs to know, including her." "It's my job," Kane said, his lips twitching slightly in a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I will contact you in a week." Brian nodded, left the envelope with the advance on the table, and left. When he got into the car, his hands were shaking, but he gripped the steering wheel to calm himself. He hated it spying on his wife, digging through her life like dirty laundry. But he saw no other way. The photo they sent him was proof, but not the answer. Who made it? Why? And what else is Ashley hiding? He should have known. At home, he was like an actor playing the role of a loving husband. He smiled, asked about her day, even offered to order dinner from her favorite Italian restaurant. Ashley answered, her voice soft, but her eyes avoiding him. He saw her checking her phone, her fingers pausing before touching the screen. He noticed how she flinched when he got too close, and every time it was like a knife cutting deeper. But he was silent. He didn't ask, didn't accuse, didn't show that he knew. He waited, collecting the pieces of her lies, like a spider weaving a web. He noticed her leaving for client meetings, but returning without papers or sketches. He saw how her cheeks turned red when she received messages and how she immediately hid her phone. He knew she was dating Jason, but he didn't know how far it went. And this ignorance was the worst of all. On Saturday, he noticed another detail. Ashley left her laptop open, and he glanced at the screen while she was in the shower. The browser was open to her email page, and there was an email from an unknown address, no subject, no text, just an attachment. He didn't open it for fear of leaving a mark, but his mind was spinning. Another photo. Threat? He closed his laptop, his heart pounding. Someone was playing with them, and he had to find out who. That evening, he watched Ashley as she prepared dinner. Her movements were graceful, but he saw the tension in her shoulders, the shadow of fear in her eyes. He wanted to grab her, shake her, force her to tell everything, but instead he smiled and said, "It smells delicious. We haven't cooked together for a long time." She smiled back, but her smile was as fragile as glass. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet. "We should repeat it." He nodded, but his thoughts were cold, calculating. His web is woven, and soon it will catch its prey. He didn't know what he would do when he found out the whole truth. He would forgive her, leave, destroy Jason. But he knew one thing. He would not stop until he knew everything. The smell of blood was in the air, and he was ready to follow the trail. Saturday afternoon was gray. The sky over the city was covered with heavy clouds promising rain. Ashley stood by the window in Jason's loft, her fingers nervously fiddling with the hem of her sweater. Cars flashed outside the window, their headlights reflected in the wet asphalt, but she saw nothing but her reflection in the glass pail, with dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. Her mind was like a taut string ready to snap. Brian, his silence, his glances, which became increasingly heavier, haunted her even here, in this refuge where she tried to hide. Jason sat on the couch, his dark hair disheveled, his shirt unbuttoned at the top button. He looked relaxed, but his eyes followed her with the same intensity, as always a mixture of desire and something deeper that she was afraid to name. He held a glass of whiskey in his hands, although it was too early for alcohol, and his fingers tapped lightly on the glass, betraying his own tension. "Ash, you look like the world is falling apart," he said finally, his voice low, with that husky edge that always made her heart beat faster. "Sit down. Talk to me." She shook her head without turning around. "I don't know what to talk about, Jason," she said, her voice quiet but tired. "Everything. Everything is too complicated." He stood up, his steps soft but sure, until he was behind her. She felt his warmth, his breath on the back of her head, and her body involuntarily responded, despite the storm in her head. "It shouldn't be difficult," he said, his voice becoming softer, almost soothing. "We can fix this, Ash. You and me." She turned, her eyes meeting his, and there was something in his gaze that made her freeze. "To correct?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How are you going to fix this, Jason? My marriage? My life? Someone knows about us. Someone is watching. And Brian, he's different. I don't know what he's thinking, but I feel it." Jason put the glass on the windowsill, his hands finding her shoulders, warm and firm. "I know you're scared," he said, his voice serious without the usual playfulness. "Me too. But we cannot continue like this, hiding, being afraid, living at half capacity. I don't want to be your secret, Ash. I want to be with you. For real." Her breathing hitched. She took a step back, but his hands held her back. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Do you understand what this means? My life, my reputation, my business. Everything will collapse." He stepped closer, his eyes burning like coals. "Then let's leave," he said. His voice was firm, but there was a pleading in it. "You and me. We can start again. Somewhere far away, California, Europe, hell, even Australia. I'll find a job. You can open a new studio. We'll be free, Ash. Without Brian, without this city, without all these eyes watching us." Ashley froze, her heart pounding so hard she was afraid he would hear. His words were like sirens, alluring and dangerous. She saw it in her head, a new city, a new life, Jason next to her, his smile, his hands, his voice, promising everything that she had lost during the years with Brian. But then reality rushed in like a cold wind. Her house, her clients, her reputation, and Brian is the man she once loved, the man she might still love despite everything. She imagined his face, his pain if it disappeared, and fear that someone knows that someone can follow them, destroy even this dream. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice hoarse, almost accusing. "Do you think I can just pick up and leave, give up everything? My marriage, my career, my life?" Jason didn't back down, his hands slid to her face, holding her gaze. "Yes," he said, his voice was firm, but there was pain in it. "Because what you have now is not life, Ash. This is a cage. You told me so yourself. You're suffocating with him. And with me. With me, you are alive. I see it every time you're here. You deserve better. We deserve better." Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. She wanted to believe him, wanted to drown in his words, but reality was like an anchor pulling her down. "What if it doesn't work?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What if we leave and everything collapses? What if they find us? The one who's watching, the one who sent this photo. They won't stop." Jason frowned, his fingers squeezing her face a little tighter. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice almost furious. "I won't let anyone hurt you. We can be careful to start with a clean slate. I've thought of everything, Ash. I have money and connections. We might disappear." She shook her head, her hands grabbing his wrists, but not pushing him away. "You don't understand," she said, her voice filled with despair. "It's not just about money or a new place. It's about me, about who I am. If I run away, I'll lose everything I've built. My business, my name, my conscience. I don't know if I can live with this." His eyes darkened, but he didn't let her go. "Can you live like this?" he asked, his voice becoming quieter but sharper. "With Brian, who looks at you like you're a stranger. With this fear that someone will reveal us. With these lies that eat you up from the inside. Ash, I see you fading away. I don't want to lose you." Her throat tightened and she turned away, her gaze falling to the floor. His words were true, and that scared her the most. She felt like her life with Brian was suffocating her, but Jason was like jumping off a cliff. She wanted him, wanted the freedom he promised, but the price was too high. She imagined Brian finding out, her clients turning away, her name becoming synonymous with scandal. And worst of all, she imagined herself living with a feeling of guilt that would never go away. "I can't," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "Not now. I'm not ready to give up everything." Jason froze, his hands slowly dropping. He looked at her, and there was a mixture of pain and determination in his eyes. "Okay," he said, his voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. "I won't force you, but I won't give up, Ash. I know how you feel about me, and I know that you deserve better than this cage." She nodded, her tears finally breaking through, running down her cheeks. "I need time," she whispered. "Please give me time." He stepped closer, his palm touching her cheek, wiping away a tear. "You have time," he said. His voice was soft, but there was a threat in it, not to her, but to the circumstances. "But not too much. I won't wait forever." Ashley closed her eyes, her body trembling. She felt his closeness, his warmth, and it was like the last breath of air before diving into water. She knew that his proposal was a deal with the devil, alluring and destructive. And although she didn't agree, she couldn't deny that part of her was already imagining this new life, where there was no Brian, no fear, just her and Jason. But the other part, the part that still loved her home, her job, her old self, kept her in place. As she drove away from his loft, the rain began to rain, its drops hitting the windshield as a reminder of her own vulnerability. She knew that she could not continue like this forever, living in two worlds, balancing on the edge. Jason gave her a choice, but it was a choice between freedom and destruction, and she wasn't ready to do it. Not yet. The silence in the Harper house became almost tangible, like a thick fog that enveloped everything around. Ashley sat at the kitchen island, her fingers nervously fiddling with the rim of her coffee mug. Monday morning was cold, gray light streaming through the windows, highlighting the shadows under her eyes. She hadn't slept well in weeks, her mind full of fears about Brian, about Jason, about the mysterious watcher who knew her secret. But today her anxiety was different, more acute, as if she was standing on the edge of an abyss, not seeing its bottom. Brian walked into the kitchen, his suit impeccable as always, but his face was cold, almost alien. He didn't look at her, just poured himself some coffee and sat down at the table, opening his laptop. His silence was not new, but now there was a thread in it, like a drawn bowstring. Ashley wanted to ask what was going on, but her throat tightened. Instead, she took a sip of coffee, trying to look calm. "Do you have meetings today?" he asked suddenly. His voice was even, but there was some strange intonation in it, as if he was testing her. She blinked, her fingers clenching around her mug. "Yes," she answered, her voice a little higher than necessary. "2 clients, then consultation on a new project. And you?" He nodded without looking up from the screen. "An ordinary day," he said, but his tone was too neutral, too rehearsed. "Just be careful, Ash. With papers, signatures, all that. People sometimes make mistakes that are costly." Her heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to smile. "Of course," she said, her voice light, but inside she felt her world begin to crack. "I'm always careful." He finally looked at her, and his gaze was like a blade sharp, cold, impenetrable. "Okay," he said, closing the laptop. "Just remember this." He stood up, took his bag, and left without saying another word. Ashley was left alone, her breathing uneven. His words echoed in her head like a warning, but she couldn't understand what he meant. She tried to convince herself that it was just her paranoia, that Brian didn't know anything, but his look, his tone. Everything said otherwise. By mid-afternoon, her world began to crumble. She was in her office, reviewing designs for a new client, when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered, thinking it was one of the suppliers. "Mrs. Harper." The voice on the other end was dry, professional, but with a note that made her freeze. "This is David Lawrence from the Financial Investigations Unit. We need to ask you a few questions about some documents related to your company." Ashley felt the blood drain from her face. "Documents?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What documents?" "We are talking about transferring funds through your company," Lawrence said, his tone even but unforgiving. "We have detected several transactions that look suspicious. Your name is on the contracts. We would like to meet with you today to discuss this." Her mind was spinning, panic washing over her like a wave. "This is some kind of mistake," she said, her voice hoarse. "I didn't sign anything suspicious. My company is engaged in interior design. We do not." "Mrs. Harper," he interrupted, "I understand this may come as a shock. But there are documents, and they are signed by you. We can discuss this in the office at 4 today. Will you come?" She nodded, although he couldn't see her. "Yes," she managed. "I will." When the call ended, she collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking so much that she dropped the phone. It was impossible. She always checked every paper, every contract. Her company was small, transparent, without a shadow of fraud. But Lawrence's words, "your signature," "suspicious transactions," were like a knife stabbed into her chest. She tried to remember a time when she could sign something without looking, but her mind went blank. And then she thought about Brian, his words in the morning, his look, his warning. She grabbed her bag and drove home, her thoughts chaotic as a storm. She had to find Brian, ask him what he knew, what he had done. But when she entered the house, he was not there. His office was empty, his laptop closed, his papers neatly folded. She opened her desk drawer, her fingers trembling, and found a folder she had never seen before. Inside were copies of documents, contracts, invoices, transfers worth millions of dollars, and each one bore her signature. But she never saw them. They were fakes, but so convincing that even she doubted for a second. Her legs gave way, and she sank into a chair. Brian, it was him. She didn't know how he did it, but his words in the morning, his coldness, his silence, everything added up to a terrifying picture. He didn't just suspect her of cheating. He decided to destroy her. This was not an accident, but a carefully planned attack, and she walked straight into a trap. Ashley closed her eyes, her tears streaming down her cheeks. Her business, her reputation, her freedom, everything was at risk. And worst of all, she knew that she could not prove her innocence. The documents were too real, and her signature too similar. Brian used his knowledge of her life, her habits, to set her up, and she saw no way out. Ashley sat in her car parked 2 blocks away, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. The rain pattered on the windshield, blurring the world outside, but her own world was already in ruins. The call from Financial Investigations, the forged documents with her signature, Brian, who she now knew was the architect of her downfall. It was all like a nightmare from which she could not wake up. Her only hope was Jason. He promised to fix everything and promised to be there. She dialed his number, her fingers trembling, but the call went to voicemail. She tried again, and again. Nothing. Panic grew like a wave ready to swallow her. She wrote to him, "Jason, I need your help. Please answer." But the screen remained dark. She waited, her breathing uneven, but there was no answer. Desperate, she drove to his loft, her car speeding through the city, ignoring red traffic lights. She had to find him. He was her anchor, her salvation. He should have known what to do. But when she got to his house, the door was locked and the windows were dark. She knocked, her fists ached, but no one answered. The neighbor, an elderly man with a dog, looked at her curiously, but she ignored him. She rang the bell again and again, but silence was the only answer. In desperation, she dialed his number again, and this time the answering machine said that the number no longer existed. Her heart sank. Jason disappeared. She stood in the rain, her clothes were wet, her hair stuck to her face, but she did not feel the cold. All she felt was betrayal, sharp as a knife. He left her alone when she needed him most. His words about a new life, about freedom, about love now seemed empty, like the wind that drove the rain down the street. Ashley returned to the car, her body trembling, not from the cold, but from rage and pain. She remembered his offer to escape, his promises, his look that made her believe. And now he was out there somewhere, perhaps in another city, in another life, while she remained under attack with fake documents, with an investigation, with Brian, who, as she now knew, was ready to destroy her. She drove home, her mind blank, as if someone had turned off the light inside her. When she walked into the house, Brian was there, sitting in the living room, his eyes watching her like a predator watching its prey. He didn't ask where she was, didn't ask why she was wet, why her face was like a death mask. He just watched, and his silence was worse than any accusation. "Are you okay?" he asked finally. His voice was even, but there was a hint of mockery in it. She didn't answer, she just walked past. Her steps were heavy, as if she was carrying the whole world on her shoulders. She locked herself in the bathroom, turned on the water, and collapsed on the floor, her tears mixing with the drops. Jason disappeared. Brian set her up. Someone knew her secret, and now she was alone, surrounded by enemies she couldn't see. Her life was in ruins, and she didn't know how to get out. The rats fled the sinking ship, and she remained on the deck, watching the water rise. The rain had not stopped for the third day. Its monotonous pounding on the roofs was like a soundtrack to Ashley's fall. She sat in her car, parked a few blocks from the Harper house, her hands shaking as they gripped the steering wheel. Her clothes were damp from the morning shower, her hair was stuck to her face, but she did not feel the cold. All she felt was emptiness, as if her soul had been ripped out, leaving only a shell. Jason had disappeared, Brian had set her up, and the investigation into a financial scam she had been dragged into with forged documents was a noose around her neck. She didn't know how she got to this point, but now her life was in ruins, and she didn't see a way back. She decided to return home, not because she hoped for forgiveness or salvation, but because she had nowhere else to go. Her office was sealed by investigators, her clients refused contracts, and her bank account was frozen. Home, her and Brian's home, where they raised their 5-year-old daughter, Lily was the last anchor she could still feel. She wanted to see Lily, hold her, breathe in her scent before everything completely collapsed. She started the car and drove off, her heart beating like a drum. As she pulled up to their street, her stomach dropped. 2 police cars were parked outside the house, their flashing lights casting blue and red reflections on the wet asphalt. She stopped, her breathing ragged. The car door opened, and she got out, her legs feeling like cotton. The rain immediately wet her face, but she didn't notice. 2 uniformed officers stood at the porch, their faces stern but not hostile. One of them, a man with short gray hair, stepped towards her. "Mrs. Harper," he asked, his voice firm but calm. Ashley nodded, her throat dry as sand. "Yes," she managed. "What's happening? This is my home." The officer looked at her, and something like sympathy flashed in his eyes. Mrs. Harper, we have a bench warrant. You are prohibited from going near this house or your daughter, Lily Harper, until further notice. Her world stopped. She felt the ground disappear from under her feet. Her hands began to tremble. What? She whispered, her voice breaking. No, this is a mistake. Lily is my daughter. I'm her mother. You can't. Mrs. Harper, interrupted the second officer, a woman with a tired face. This is a court decision. Your husband filed a plea and the judge issued a temporary restraining order. You need to leave the area. If you violate the order, we will be forced to detain you. Ashley shook her head, her tears mixing with the rain. Brian, her voice was hoarse, almost a scream. He can't. He has no right. Lily is my daughter. We understand this is difficult, the first officer said, his tone softening. But you must obey. Do you have a lawyer? You should contact him. Ashley stepped back, her feet tripped on the curb, and she nearly fell. She looked at their house, with its white shutters and neat lawn where Lily had played hide and seek last summer. She imagined her there inside, with her curly hair and laughter that was like music, and Brian, who took even that from her. Her daughter, her life. Please, she whispered, her voice broken. Just let me see her. Once, I won't do anything wrong. The officer shook his head. I'm sorry, ma'am. We can't allow this. Please get back in the car and drive away. Ashley stood in the rain, her body shaking, but she couldn't move. She wanted to scream, to rush to the door, to rush inside, but she knew that it would not change anything. The policemen looked at her, their hands on their belts, ready to act. She turned slowly, her legs moving as if in a dream, and got into the car. The engine started, but she didn't know where to go. She had nothing, no home, no daughter, no future. She stayed at a motel on the outskirts of town, the cheapest one she could find. The room smelled damp and cheap detergent, but that was all she could afford. Her account was frozen and her credit cards were blocked. She sat on the edge of the bed, her clothes still damp, and stared into space. Her phone was almost dead, but she couldn't bring herself to plug it into a charger. Who should I call? Jason disappeared. Her lawyer, whom she hired to investigate, was powerless against forged documents that looked too real. Her friends, those who had not yet turned away, could not help. She was alone. The next day, when she returned to the motel after a fruitless meeting with the lawyer, an envelope was waiting for her, shoved under the door. Plain, white, unmarked, just like the one Brian received. Her hands shook as she opened it, her heart pounding. Inside was a handwritten letter. Brian's handwriting was so familiar that she almost choked. Work. I knew. I knew about you and Jason from the moment I got that photo. I saw how you lie, how you hide your phone, how you slip out of our lives. I gave you a chance to make things right, but you chose it. You betrayed me, our daughter, everything we built. I couldn't let this continue. Do you think the documents are an accident? This is wrong. I did what I had to do to protect Lily, to protect our family. You lost your right to be her mother when you decided to destroy us. The court is on my side, and I will do everything to ensure that you never get close to her. I don't wish you harm, but you must understand, everything you lose is your fault. You made a choice. Now live with him. Brian. Ashley finished reading the letter. Her hands were shaking so much that the paper fell to the floor. She fell to her knees, her tears flowing silently, like rain outside the window. He knew. All this time he knew and weaved his web to destroy her. Forged documents, a restraining order, an investigation, all this was his revenge, cold and calculating. And Lily, her daughter, her light, was taken from her as if she had never been her mother. She picked up the letter, her fingers gripping it as if they could tear the truth apart. But the truth was inexorable. Her house was lost. Brian filed for divorce and, as she learned from the lawyer, had already signed the mortgage into his name. Her daughter was out of reach. The judge issued a temporary order, and Brian, with his money and connections, could make it permanent. And her freedom hung in the balance. An investigation into a financial scam threatened charges that could send her to prison for years. Her signature on those documents, although forged, was too convincing, and her reputation was in tatters. Ashley lay down on the bed, her body curled into a ball. She felt like an animal driven into a corner without the strength to fight. Jason, who promised to be there, disappeared like smoke. Brian, whom she once loved, became her executioner. And someone the one who started this by sending that photo was still there, in the shadows, watching her fall. She didn't know who it was, but that didn't matter now. Her life was destroyed, and all she had left was the motel room, Brian's letter, and the emptiness that consumed her from the inside. She closed her eyes, her breathing uneven. Somewhere in the depths of her mind, a thought flashed about Lily, about her laughter, about the way she held her tiny hand. This thought was the only thing that kept her from completely falling apart. She didn't know how, but she had to find a way to fight. For myself, for my daughter, even if it meant going against Brian, against the system, against the whole world. The retribution was brutal, but she was not ready to give up yet. Ashley's motel room became her prison, filled with a smell of dampness and despair. The light from the single lamp on the nightstand flickered, casting shadows on the peeling walls. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clutching Brian's letter, which she reread dozens of times until the words were ingrained in her mind. Her life was in ruins. Her home was lost, Lily was taken away, her reputation was destroyed, and an investigation into a financial scam in which she was drawn into forged documents threatened with prison time. She was on the edge, and every new day was like stepping on thin ice. Tuesday morning began with an unexpected knock on the door. Ashley winced, her heart pounding. She was not expecting guests, no one knew where she was except her lawyer, and even he had long since ceased to inspire hope. She walked slowly to the door, her hand hovering on the handle, but then she opened it, expecting to see the motel owner, or worse, the police. Two men in formal suits stood on the threshold, a man and a woman, their faces as impenetrable as masks. A man with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too much showed his badge. "Mrs. Harper?" he asked, his voice level but commanding. "Agent Crow, FBI. This is Agent Davis. We need to talk." Ashley felt her legs give way, but she nodded, stepping back to let them in. They entered, their presence making the room even smaller. She sat down on the bed, her hands clenched into fists to hide her trembling. "About what?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "I've already talked to your people. I didn't sign those documents. It's a fake copy." Agent Crow sat down on the chair opposite, his gaze tenacious, like that of a predator. Agent Davis remained standing, her arms crossed, her eyes watching Ashley intently. "We know," Crow said, his tone calm but steely. "We are not here to discuss documents. We're here because of Jason Clark." Ashley froze, her breathing ragged. Jason's name, spoken so casually, was like a blow. She hasn't heard from him since he disappeared, leaving her alone under attack. "Jason?" she asked, trying to sound surprised. "I don't know where he is. He's missing." Kuro smiled slightly, but there was no warmth in his smile. "We know he was your close friend," he said, pausing to let the word hang in the air. "And we know that he didn't just disappear. Jason Clark is a key figure in a multi-state money laundering scheme. Those documents that have your signature on them, they're part of his operation, and we think you can help us find it." Ashley felt her world crumble even more. Jason, money laundering. She knew he was no angel. His life was always full of shadows, deals he didn't explain, but this was too much. She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't know," she whispered. I thought it was Brian. He set me up. He knew about us, and—" "Your husband," Agent Davis interrupted, her voice harsh but not hostile, "really played a role. He gave us information about the documents, but his motives are personal. We're looking at the big picture. Clark is our target, and you, Mrs. Harper, are faced with a choice." Ashley looked up, her throat tightening. "By choice?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Kuro leaned closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "We can prove you didn't know about the scheme," he said. "We can drop the charges against you and give you back your chance at life. But for this, you must cooperate. Surrender Clark. Tell us everything, where he might be, who he is connected with, what you know. If you do, we'll protect you. If not. He paused, his gaze growing colder. You will sit in his place. Those documents with your signature, they are convincing enough to send you to prison for 7 years. And your daughter, Lily, will remain with your husband. Forever. Ashley felt her heart break. Lily, her daughter, her only light in this nightmare. The thought that she would never see her, never hug her, never hear her laugh was unbearable. But handing over Jason, she remembered his eyes, his voice, his promises. He betrayed her, disappeared, but part of her still clung to him, to the spark that he kindled in her. And yet the choice was clear, her life, her daughter, or his freedom. I don't know where he is, she said, her voice shaking. He didn't call, didn't write. His number has been disconnected. I was looking for him. Davis stepped closer, her tone hard. Then think about it, Mrs. Harper. Think about the places where he could be, about the people he talked to, about anything. You have 24 hours to make a decision. If you refuse, we will consider you an accomplice. Curo stood up, his business card laying on the nightstand. Call me when you're ready, he said. Don't force us to make a decision for you. They walked away, leaving Ashley in a silence that was louder than any noise. She looked at the business card, her hands shaking. The choice was simple, but unbearable. She could save herself, regain the chance to see Lily, but at the cost of Jason's betrayal. Or she could remain silent, protecting him, and lose everything. She closed her eyes, her tears flowing silently. Time was running out, and she knew she had to choose. Ashley stood at the window of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, her breathing uneven, her heart beating like a drum. The night was cold, the moon was hiding behind the clouds, and only the faint light of a lantern illuminated the deserted street. She was here at Agent Crow's behest, with a microphone hidden under her jacket, and with one mission: to frame Jason. The FBI found him. He was hiding in a neighboring state, but agreed to meet with her when she wrote to him from a new number, begging for help. She knew that this was her last chance to save herself, but every step towards this meeting was like a knife in her chest. She made a choice. After long hours in the motel room, staring at Curo's card and introducing Lily, she called him. She told everything she knew about Jason, his habits, places where he could hide, the names of the people he mentioned. It wasn't much, but it was enough for the FBI to track him down. In exchange, they promised to drop the charges against her and help her fight the restraining order against Lily. But the price was high. She had to lure Jason into a trap. The warehouse door creaked open and Ashley turned around. Jason walked in, his dark hair hidden under his hood, but she recognized him by the way he walked, by the way his eyes found her in the darkness. He looked exhausted, his face drawn, but his smile when he saw her was the same, cocky, warm, dangerous. "Ash," he said, his voice hoarse but full of relief. He stepped towards her, his hands reaching out to her face, but she retreated, her heart clenching. "Jason," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Why did you leave? Why did you leave me?" He frowned, his eyes darkening. "I didn't mean to," he said, his voice sincere, but there was a hint of lies in it. "Things got too hot, Ash. I thought you were safe, that Brian wouldn't touch you. I didn't know about the documents, about the investigation. I tried to protect you." She shook her head, her tears threatening to break through. "You're lying," she said, her voice harsh. "You knew you were being watched. You knew that I would remain under attack, and you just ran away." He stepped closer, his hands grabbed her shoulders, and she felt his warmth, his scent, which still drove her crazy. "Ash, listen," he said, his voice almost a plea. "I can fix everything. We can leave, like I said. I found a place, money, everything is ready. Just trust me." Her heart was breaking. She wanted to believe him, wanted to throw herself into his arms, forget about the FBI, about Brian, about Lily. But she knew that this was the end. The microphone under her jacket recorded his every word, and outside, in the shadows, agents waited. She had made a choice, and now she had to follow through with it. "I trusted you," she said, her voice broken, "and look where I am now." Without a home, without a daughter, on the verge of prison. You destroyed me, Jason. His eyes widened, but before he could respond, she stepped toward him, her arms wrapping around his neck. She kissed him fiercely, desperately, as if this was their last moment. This was their last moment. His lips responded, his hands squeezed hers, and for a second she let herself drown in it, in his taste, his warmth, in what could have been. But then she pulled away, her eyes full of tears. "Goodbye," she whispered. The warehouse door swung open and lantern light poured in. "FBI, hands up," Agent Crow shouted, his voice echoing throughout the room. Jason turned around, his face contorted in shock, but he didn't resist. The agents surrounded him and handcuffed him, their movements quick and precise. He looked at Ashley, and in his eyes there was not anger, but pain deep, tearing. "You?" he asked, his voice barely audible. She didn't answer. Her tears were streaming down her cheeks. She turned away, unable to watch him being taken away. The noise of footsteps, the voices of agents, the slamming of doors, everything mixed into a cacophony that drowned out her own thoughts. When everything died down, she was left alone, her body trembling as if she had been turned inside out. Kuro returned, his face unreadable. "You did it," he said. "The charges will be dropped. We will begin the trial in your case about Lily, but you need to disappear for a while until we deal with the others." Ashley nodded, her gaze blank. She won, but the victory was as bitter as ashes. She saved herself, but she lost everything that made her herself. Jason, whom she had loved, whom she had betrayed, was now a ghost, just like her old life. She was no longer the same Ashley, not a wife, not a mother, not even a woman who dreamed of freedom. She was a shadow, and that last kiss was her farewell to who she once was. She walked out of the warehouse, the rain hitting her face, but she didn't feel it. Lily was out there somewhere, and she would live for her. But inside she knew, her soul remained in that warehouse, in that kiss, in that life that she would never return. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.